Quest for Balance comes out today, and guess who can't play it? Yeah, apparently I would have to probably drive across state lines to find a store that actually has it in stock, unfortunately. So this is going to be sort of an unscripted video where I talk about 3 candidates that I would consider to be among the conversation of the worst Avatar episode of the entire show. And when I say worst Avatar episode, keep in mind that I'm really talking about the least good Avatar episodes because, for example, you wouldn't rate Avatar the same way that you would a show like The Fairly OddParents. For The Fairly OddParents, pretty much, if I rated every Avatar episode on that scale, pretty much every episode would be a good episode. So I'm trying to find the episode of the show that contributes the least to the overall narrative. And that probably means that I'm going to sound a lot more nitpicky in this video than I usually do, which I know is already kind of a criticism a lot of people have of me. But just know that I'm really trying to figure out the least good episode of a really, really good show. Relative to how I would rate other shows, I quote-unquote like every episode that I'm about to talk about in this video. I don't hate any of them. I wouldn't curse the world if I had to go back and rewatch them, which I did for this video. Going in chronological order, the first one I want to talk about is The Great Divide, which fans talk about a lot as an example of an episode that teaches a bad lesson, which I can certainly understand, as essentially the lesson of the episode and the thing that Aang learns from the episode is it's okay to lie to people to solve problems. But not only that, the location of the Great Divide and the 2 tribes that we meet in the episode aren't very interesting in their own way. They feel very out of place for the show, and honestly, like, for the other filler episodes of the show, that's something I honestly can't say that they've ever done outside of this episode. Especially because the previous episode, Jet, taught a lesson that is really deep and a lot of kids' shows really would not touch, especially at the time, which was, it's just because you're against the bad guys doesn't automatically make you a good guy, which, that's a valuable lesson that I think people really should learn. The problem is that I guess they wanted to kind of do something like that again and just failed at it. Because the conflict resolution in this episode is very contrived. Like, they had to find a way to solve the conflict in the episode, and they're like, oh yeah, just have Aang lie to these people and make up a story that makes them not hate each other. It's very convenient, and considering that the next episode is a fan favorite, because of, the depth of the story and the thought put into it, I really think that they had their eggs in that basket, and they're like, oh, you gotta have something for the 11th episode spot, just, throw this out there. And so, it's, from a storytelling standpoint, it's not really how you would tell that kind of story. They meet these 2 tribes, they've got to cross this canyon, and the 2 tribes hate each other, and so we learn a little bit about them, but we never see them in the show again. And keep in mind, other Avatar episodes very much, even if they're kind of more fillery episodes, they still connect to the rest of the show in some way. Not this one. We never see the canyon crawlers again. We rarely hear about the Great Divide. They did mention it in the Ember Island episode toward the end, but we never see these 2 tribes again. We never hear their story be mentioned again, just even in passing. So this really does, if any episode fit the definition of filler episode, it would be this one. And at the end of the episode, it's like a slap in the face that Aang learns that, I can just lie to these people and that solves their conflict, and it's okay because it solved their conflict, even though I did it on deceptive reasons. And so a lot of that rubbed people the wrong way with this episode, and I can certainly see why. Now, the good things I would say for this episode is I do like the visuals. The visuals are nice for the episode. I like that we see Sokka and Katara kind of pick a side in the tribal conflict. I think that makes sense for the characters and all that. But just, the rest of the episode to me is kind of a wasted opportunity. I think they could have done more with the concept for sure, and it's very un-Avatar-like the way that they tell this story. The second candidate is, of course, Bato of the Water Tribe. A lot of people saw that coming. And when you look at the episode, it's easy to see why. Sokka and Katara are unreasonably cruel to Aang in this episode, but also Aang himself he's kind of unlikable. I get that they were trying to go for the, he doesn't really fit in with the whole Water Tribe sort of culture, and it's, growing pains of realizing, he might lose his friends over this, and I don't know. To me, it doesn't seem like Aang. It seemed like he would be honest, but I'm glad that they do at least make him make a mistake, but the way they deal with it is less than desirable. Especially because Bato himself is kind of a blank slate. We don't get a lot of unique character traits. It's just like, he's a Water Tribe guy, and he's part of their military. And I think that kind of hinders the episode a little bit, because sure, Sokka and Katara are, glad to see, basically this guy that's a piece of their culture, but also, it connects them to their father as basically the only family they have outside of their grandmother. And so I do understand, from their standpoint, being upset at Aang for hiding this information from them, but at the same time, I don't know how they managed to make both Sokka and Katara unlikable, and also Aang unlikable at the same time in this scenario, which is what they did, and that's really what rubs fans the wrong way, because it's easily the worst example of character in, the show. Because usually, the characters are very interesting, the characters all have interesting reasons for the things that they do, and it really helps the narrative. And in this episode, I feel like they needed to have maybe a group conflict, but they have group conflicts in other episodes. And they do it a lot better because in those episodes, they at least give them reasons to, want to go back at the end. It feels more just like, oh, well, we have to. We don't want to, but we have to. And it comes across as very callous, and it also makes me wonder, like, how long did it take them really to warm back up to Aang, in the next episode or whatever? Because it is kind of another filler episode, like toward the end, like between Jet and the North Pole arc, there's a lot of episodes that could be considered filler, and this is kind of one of them. We do learn about some Water Tribe customs and things like that, and I did like that about this episode, but, the character interactions in this episode are some of the worst of the entire show. I know it sounds like I'm, kind of rambling about that, but, when you hold this show to a level of scrutiny, I mean, that's what you do when the show is of the quality that it's of. It's a very quality show, and so certain things are expected, and when they don't meet that standard, it's very rare when they don't meet the standard, but when they don't meet the standard, it's very awkward. And that's really how I would describe this episode in one word. I think it is very awkward, the way that they handle the character interactions in this episode, and I'm glad that they made Bato a more interesting character in his later appearances in the show, and I'm glad that we don't see any moments like this anymore. But just, like, Aang ruins this episode for me, and that's your main character. That should never happen, but it does. And so, yeah, that's really disappointing to see. And the third episode I'm going to talk about is The Painted Lady, which is, it's not great for different reasons than the first two. So, season 3, to me, was the season that least deserved to have the filler episodes. And, filler is a relative term, I realize that. In the first half of season 3, most of the episodes don't really connect to the greater narrative that much. I mean, they kind of do, some of them, but I mean, even my favorite episode of the series is in that span. So I'm not, dissing the first half of book 3. But The Painted Lady is the biggest example of this, and especially because the writers clearly reference why the episode doesn't work. And they do this through Sokka's mentions about the schedule. You've got to stay on the schedule, which really isn't brought up in any other episode. It's just something that they brought along to kind of force tension in the episode. But by doing this, they kind of admit why the episode doesn't really make sense to happen. You could have, I don't know, maybe in this episode they could have, brought up something with, like, maybe they could have brought up more about Iroh in prison or something. They could have connected to the greater narrative, in my opinion, more than they did in this episode. And it really does hurt the episode. They're basically admitting, hey, the schedule's very important. We've got to stay on schedule. But by the way, here's an episode that has nothing to do with anything. And that bothers me probably more than it should, just considering the quality of the rest of Season 3, the rest of Book 3. I mean, most people, that are fans either say Book 2 or Book 3 is their favorite. And just due to the high volume, to me, of, in the first half of the season, episodes that don't really connect that much to the greater narrative, Puppet Master, Runaway, Headband, episodes like that, and this is one of them. To me, Season 2, Book 2 is better. But yeah, Painted Lady, to me, is just an episode where, they stop in this town, and, they help bring it back to livability, because it's a very polluted town due to, like, the Fire Nation plant that's nearby, and they just run these guys out of town. And yeah, I understand that, like, a lot of Book 1 was, like, the gang going to towns and, like, helping out and stuff like that. So they're trying to bring back that feel of the show, which is fine, I wouldn't have necessarily had a problem with it if the episode itself didn't reference, the reason why it doesn't make sense. If you tell me that, the schedule's very important, we got to stay on schedule, we've got to, get things moving, then, actually do that. And Sokka's not really treated as very out of place in this episode. He's kind of the quote-unquote antagonist of the episode, if you want to call it that. But at the end, like, Sokka ends up helping them out. So I don't even really know if you can call it that. So, I mean, that's kind of my problems. And also, like, the visuals are just really dull and drab. And I know it's a polluted town, so I know that's kind of what they're going for. But the visuals just seem very off in this episode. But, other than that, it's not... I don't hate this episode as much as other people do. Like, some people actually do hate this episode and, like, consider it to be, like, the only bad episode of the series. I don't think it's nearly that. But I do understand the problems that people have with this episode. So, which of these episodes do I think is the worst of the 3 and the worst of the entire Avatar: The Last Airbender series? It's Bato of the Water Tribe. The other 2 episodes I can sort of stomach, and if I just happened to catch them airing in a rerun, I wouldn't, like, not watch it. Bato of the Water Tribe is one that genuinely is difficult to watch just because of how the character interactions are structured. I know there's the cool, Zuko fight at the end of the episode, but as far as, like, a character interaction standpoint, when you have characters that are in conflict with each other, well, relative conflict, but in conflict with each other, and then they also both happen to be unlikable from both sides of the issue, it's really difficult to watch. And most of the time when that happens, it's very difficult to write your way out of that in a way that doesn't seem contrived, because those things rarely get resolved simply, or as simply as you can in a 22-minute window. And so, it's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the one black mark on Avatar: The Last Airbender's character interactions. I think there's really not a bad character moment outside of that, or at least as bad of a character moment as that. And even still, like, we're talking about like one of the best animated series ever made, and even the worst episode of that series still has aspects to it that I liked, which is a testament to how good the show is. And so I do dislike the character interactions in that episode and the way the story unfolds, but I still enjoyed aspects of it. And the Great Divide and the Painted Lady were really just bad because they didn't connect to the narrative and they felt pointless. Now, Great Divide had other issues, with the way Aang learned the lesson. So Painted Lady is probably the least bad of the three that I mentioned in this video, and then Great Divide is in the middle. But Bato of the Water Tribe, I think, is the worst episode of the series, and a lot of people go back and forth between that and the Great Divide. Sometimes I go back and forth with myself on that, but I do feel right in definitively saying that Bato of the Water Tribe is the worst episode of Avatar. So if you like what I do, and you want to see maybe a more organized, scripted video, there's plenty on my channel. I encourage you to check them out. And subscribe if you enjoyed the video and liked the video. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.